Hi,
Hello.
everyone. I'm Ethan Smith. Oh, I'm sorry. No, you go ahead then.
Yeah, you can talk, Reid. You're good. Hello. It's a beautiful Saturday afternoon here on the East Coast. My name is Ethan. We are here for the IOCDF Saturday Town Hall. As usual, we would like a few minutes to come in, get settled, grab some sushi. It's fresh. Have a seat, get comfortable. We will be starting in exactly 90 seconds. In the meantime, let us know you're here. Say hello. Let us know where you're from. We always like to say hi. And we will go from there. This is the portion of the town hall where I pretend to be busy and do really important things. So I will look around and then. So we've got, hi, Peter from Boston. Peter's in Boston. I heard, actually, Peter, it snowed there, no, recently? And then Jenny in Ithaca, New York. And we got Angela from New Orleans. Hey, Katie, how are you? Katie in Austin. Debbie from Natick, Mass. We have JS from the Netherlands. Katie from nowhere. Katie just says, hey, y'all. Hey, Michelle from Southern California. Lots and lots of familiar faces. We will start in exactly 40 seconds. Hey, Crystal from Dallas. What's up? There's my friend from Texas. So come on in, get comfortable. We will start in exactly 30 seconds. Hi from Nice, France. I hope one day you tell my story as a person living with OCD since childhood on the site of your foundation. Oh, Claudette, how are you? Good to see you again. Yes, we would love to share your story. You should definitely email us. Annapolis, trained at ASDI in Maryland. Reid has been one of my heroes since the 90s. That's when he was, what, 16, 17?
Ethan, that's so thoughtful of you to say that.
I'm here to support. Jelly Bean, whose favorite flavor is watermelon, from Florida. We've got Wendy from Athens, Georgia. Let's get this party started. First of all, thank you for joining us this Saturday afternoon. It is the IOCDF COVID-19. My name is Ethan. If you know me, then you know me. If you don't know me, I am the National Ambassador for the International OCD Foundation. I also have OCD, so the name just means I like to talk about my OCD very loudly all the time in an effort to educate and reduce stigma on a daily, hourly, and minutely basis. Minutely, that should be a word. I'm super excited today. I actually don't have any initial housekeeping conversations to have with you guys. I think we can jump right into it. I'm really excited to have two amazing guests and good friends, Shala Nicely and Dr. Reid Wilson. So for those of you that are on the stream today, and for those of you that are just joining us, hello. The stream will move a little bit differently today. Reid and Shala have put together an amazing program comprised and built around the attitude of recovery, COVID-19 and beyond, talking about strategies and moving forward. It's really, really good stuff. So if you guys want to grab a pen and a paper, you can definitely take notes. These are all actionable items that you can put toward your own recovery and your own, wherever you are in your process. We'll probably do that. Hey, Nikki from Ireland, what's up, you? We will probably do that for 42 minutes, and then we'll open it up to questions, and we'll have the back half for questions, comments, and anything else. If you do have questions as we're going through this, don't hesitate to ask. I'll keep an eye on the comment thread, and if you need elaboration or have a question that pertains to what they're talking about, feel free to ask, and we'll go from there. So with that, thank you for joining us. I will start with my far left, Beauty for Brains, and then there's Reid. So Shala Nicely is an LPC. She's the author, which is a licensed professional counselor. She's the author of Is Fred in the Refrigerator? Taming OCD and Reclaiming My Life. I do have to say I've read the book. She did not ask me to do this, although feel free to send money, but she did not ask me to do this. It's an insanely amazing book and a really, really vulnerable and truthful inside look into her life, her OCD, where she got now. It's really, really good, and it reads a lot like a fictional narrative. It's really character driven. I highly recommend it. It's fantastic.
If only it had been fictional.
I know, that's true. That's a great point. If only. Unfortunately, it's not, but it's a really fantastic read. She's also the co-author with John Hirschfeld, who we've had on the stream, of Everyday Mindfulness for OCD: Tips, Tricks, and Skills for Living Joyfully. She's a counselor and cognitive behavioral therapist in Metro Atlanta, Georgia, and she produces The Shoulders Back, which I like to read and do at the same time. Come on, everyone. Yes. Tips and Resources for Taming OCD newsletter. Last but certainly not. No, thank you, Shala. I should have said, you said hello. last but certainly not least, we have Dr. Reid Wilson. Reid is a clinical psychologist. He runs a large free self-help site for anxiety and OCD called anxieties.com with over 800,000 visitors per year. He's been running our intensive treatment groups at, oh, yes, it is our, off script, Reid. He's been running our intensive treatment groups at our annual conference every year for the past 10 years. In fact, that's where he has met Shala. So he does these incredible groups before the conference. It's an intensive program for OCD sufferers, and it's extremely beneficial to the community, and lots of good work happens there. So thank you, Dr. Wilson, for coming on.
Yes, Ethan, good.
A quick question before we start. Have you read all the books behind you?
I have at least earmarked a few of them.
Okay. All right. Curious. So with that in mind, enough Ethan humor. It's mediocre at best. So the title of this particular town hall is The Attitude of Recovery, COVID-19 and Beyond. So Reid, what do you mean by the attitude of recovery?
Well, let's just think about what treatment is like. As you work along with treatment, you want to end up having some punchlines, some things that you figure out, some things you discover. Like, you know, this is about uncertainty, and whatever I do around my disorder, I've got to be willing to sit with uncertainty. So as you do ERP and whatever treatment you're doing, you're going to come to some conclusions, and that's really what we're talking about. As treatment solidifies and you're learning those lessons, they can really be formulated like a strategy, like, you know, a set of principles. And what we like to think about them is that we want to make them as simple as it can possibly be. So in essence, they are like an attitude, a disposition, an orientation, a frame of mind. You know, we're going to go from being a victim of this disorder to a pretty fairly good competitor with this disorder to take it down. And I think that's what we're talking about here with this attitude. This is a relationship. We are in a relationship with the disorder, and it starts off with the disorder dominating us, and we want to flip that around. Really, we want to, at least in the beginning, I think that we need to flip it totally around. I think in the end, where we want to get to is a kind of neutrality about it all. But in the beginning, as we formulate these strategies, we learn how to disrupt the dominant paradigm, disrupt the pattern that's currently there, mess with it. The disorder wants us to do a particular task or have a particular fear, and we want to start changing all of those around. We're not looking to end the relationship. The relationship ends when the relationship ends, if it ever ends. We're going to focus on how do we maintain ourselves in the face of the disorder showing up again and again. So that's what we really want to shape in this time with you.
All right, so let's explore that a little further. So I'm not quite sure what you mean by relationship. As Reid would say, let's put some meat on those bones, Shala. So how would this look in real life? Put it in real life terms.
In real life, what this looks like is externalizing and personifying your OCD. So in is Fred in the Refrigerator, I made my OCD a character in the book. And I didn't do this for literary effect. I did this because this is how I think of it. My OCD is a character in my life. It is part of me, but it is also separate from me. And I think of my OCD as being personified in two different ways based on how it's currently acting. When I was untreated, my OCD was very aggressive, very overwhelming. And so I think of it as this monster that I call the Triad of Hell. And it is this thing that looms over me, sort of like those specters of death that you see. And it hovers over me with these scaly, dead-like hands, almost like a grizzly bear behind you that's going to strike and kill you, because that's what it felt like. It's aggressive, it's dominant, it's forceful, it's threatening. A lot of times the way I felt when I had untreated OCD was like I had a gun barrel pressed to my temple that I couldn't get away from. Now, however, after I've been in recovery for almost a decade, I've done lots and lots of exposure and response prevention therapy. My OCD does not assume the form of the Triad of Hell very often. And the form it does assume, and I actually brought it with me, because, like Reid said about the relationship, I still have a relationship with my OCD, right? So this is what it looks like when it's not really bothering me.
Reid and I tilted our head the same way at the same time. That's great.
And OCD will tilt its head the same way as you guys. Oh, that's backwards. No, over here. There we go.
Does it squeak or
what?
Does it squeak? If you squeeze it, does it squeak?
Let's see. Oh, it complains.
Oh, yeah,
okay. It does. Good point. I never thought about that. We can think about that when we torture it. So anyway, this is what it looks like because it's pretty docile. It will whine and cry about things that don't bother it very much, just sort of low-level worries. And that's why it has a Kleenex taped to it, because it cries and its nose runs. And so, it has to have something to wipe its nose. And I think about, what's it doing when it's not bothering me? It's sitting on the floor and it's knitting. So here's its little scarf that it knits, and it just sits on the floor and knits and knits and knits and knits and knits. And so this is actually how I see my OCD, as silly as it may seem, because it helps me to understand that it's a part of me, but it's not me. And it helps me to understand it as something that's trying to manipulate me. But again, it's separate from me.
That's wonderful. I just have to say lots of people are really enjoying this information. Lots of great shout outs. So thank you. For those of you that are just tuning in, this is being recorded, so you can watch it back in its entirety. So so no worries. And also Deirdre said her dog likes the squeak, Shala, which is important. So so hold that up for a minute. So you, and this is what I found, hold your OCD back up. So this actually I found really interesting in your book, because I obviously went through a lot of treatment and recovery in my own OCD journey, but your approach to OCD, which I know modeled after Reid and the work that he has done, I found very interesting and very helpful. So you've really made an effort to physically personify your OCD and see it as something separate from you.
Yes, definitely. Because when you see it as separate, you can see it as something that has a strategy, and you can identify what it's doing to try to win. And you can look at the patterns that it has. And if you can understand these patterns and interrupt them, that's how you can put yourself in a position where you can be the one who wins. And what I mean by patterns, and everybody's can be different, but let me give you an example of 3 of the patterns that my OCD exhibits. So one pattern is that when my OCD is really upset, when it's assuming this, Triad of Hell form, the anxiety that I feel rises like molten lava in my chest. It completely consumes my core. It is a different kind of anxiety than I feel if it's anxiety about something that's not related to OCD. So that's one pattern. Another pattern goes back to the primary ritual that I did. I had lots and lots of rituals, but the big one that I did was mentally ritualizing. And so I would spend a lot of time up in my head, analyzing, figuring things out, replaying, justifying. And so a pattern that I can use to recognize my OCD now is I'm up in my head trying to figure something out, and I need to know right now. Nothing else matters in my life other than knowing the answer to this particular thing. So that's another really characteristic hallmark of my OCD. And finally, if I don't follow what my OCD is saying, according to it, the catastrophic consequences that will follow will be completely overwhelming, and I will never, ever, ever be able to recover because my OCD is a drama queen. So that helps me recognize what my OCD is doing. When I see those patterns, where it's trying to dominate me, then I can make my goal to change and interrupt that pattern and to mess with it.
All right. So Reid, let's say we've identified the pattern, and let's go back then. How does attitude play into that?
Yeah, well, first, if you just kind of think back around how Shala was talking, she kept referencing how it is that she does it. That's part of what we want to emphasize, is that she's figuring it out, and how she does it now is different than how she did it a while back, and who knows how it'll be for her later, although she's got a system that is pretty great right now. So what Shala was doing is trying to figure out, how does OCD come at her? And that's part of what everyone needs to figure out. What's its mechanism of action with you specifically? And that takes a little bit of time and, understanding and looking and studying. And once you can kind of figure that piece out, then you adopt a stance that's going to, again, attitude is going to be paradoxical, which is, I'm looking at what does the OCD need from me, and I'm going to basically do the best I can to shift that around. So if you can get that spirit, that disposition, that attitude, I often do, it's like it's up here. You want to step back from the moment, get up here and grab your attitude, the disposition that you have, and then bring it down and let it manifest itself in the moment. The attitude that you take on is the engine that kind of pulls your train out of the station and down the path towards what you want in your life, your positive outcome in your life. So, some examples that I think are pretty core to all of us is, I want this struggle right now. So if I'm in the middle of a struggle with the disorder, I want it, because existentially speaking, it's here. And the biggest trouble we tend to have with OCD is our resistance, our wanting to get rid of it, our trying to push it away. And this is an aggressive sport. I want to step in and I want this, not like, oh, I have to face this. I'm okay with people thinking that, but then to metabolize that idea and make it your own. And so therefore I want this. And then there's the doubt that comes in, and I want to get to a place where I can say to myself, I can handle this doubt. This is what happens with people with panic disorder. They have to eventually say, I can handle a panic attack if it comes, as opposed to, I can't have any more panic attacks. And I think another big category of attitude is I'm choosing not to figure this out, because there tends to be a question on the table when an OCD event shows up. And my decision is, I'm not going there. I'm going to sit with not knowing. So you bring that attitude into the fire, right? And that's where the work really, I think, takes hold.
You're kind of identifying rigidity versus flexibility, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. It needs you to have, and we're going to talk about some rigidity later in terms of rules, but it needs you to, have a way to do it, and don't change that way. So that's what Shala was saying earlier about, we're going to look for the pattern and mess with it. Whatever I'm doing that's not working now, let me do anything else and see what happens. And it's a path of discovery until we can lock down a strategy that really starts to work for us. And then, over time, perhaps that strategy doesn't work anymore because OCD does an end around. And then we got to regroup and try to figure that out again.
That makes perfect sense. For everybody that's leaving questions, keep leaving questions. We will get to your questions a little bit later in the stream, so feel free to ask. People are saying, Dr. Wilson and Shala, this is really, really helpful. I'm thanking you. So Shala, we were talking earlier about something that happened to you last week. Would you tell people about it? Because I think that's a good example of what we're talking about here, no?
Yes. Before I tell this story, let me just start out by saying, as some background, that my OCD loves emergency rooms, loves them, is very comforted just by their existence. And I have spent a fair amount of time in emergency rooms in my life, hit by a car, my horse fell on top of me, I needed rabies shots. My life has been a little too interesting at some points. But all those reasons were legit reasons to go to the ER. I have also spent a bunch of time in emergency rooms that was completely not legit, that I was there because my OCD wanted to know if this stomach pain or this bump on my head or whatever it was going to kill me in the next 24 hours, and it had to know right then. So I've spent a lot of time in emergency rooms. Last week, I woke up in the middle of the night and had some pretty severe stomach pain. And I thought, oh boy, feels like food poisoning. So I get up out of bed, start heading to the bathroom. And as I start walking, all of a sudden, all these intrusive thoughts start bombarding me. Well, what if we're really sick? And what if we really need to go to the emergency room? Well, that would be terrible because we can't go to the emergency room right now because the only people that can go to emergency rooms are people who have COVID. Oh my gosh, what if we have COVID right now? Oh my gosh, that would be terrible because then we'd have shortness of breath, which, oh my gosh, we have right now. We have shortness of breath. And what if we can't breathe? And what if we can't get medical attention? And we're going to sit here in the bathroom and nobody's going to help us? We're going to die right in the middle of the bathroom floor. At the moment, I didn't recognize that for what it was. And it felt really real. And it felt to me, because of my history with emergency rooms, because of my OCD, that, gosh, I need to do something about this. And what I said to myself to try to manage this was, I have to make all these symptoms go away right now because I can't go to an ER. And that was all it took. I pushed back against the physical symptoms I was having and I made them explode. And I went right into a panic attack, which I'd never actually had before. But I was really short of breath. I was dizzy. I was woozy. I was hugging the toilet and trying not to hit the floor. It was awful. But I treat people who have panic disorder as well as treating people who have OCD. So I know what to do about this. People get panic attacks when they're afraid of the physical sensations they're experiencing, the physical sensations of their anxiety. And I was pushing those sensations away by saying, I have to get this under control because I can't go to an emergency room. And so I knew what I needed to do. So I said, okay, I want this anxiety. I can handle this. I want to be feeling like this. And I said it about like that, with about that much enthusiasm. And over the next hour, as I went back and forth between my bed and the bathroom, I would fall asleep for a few minutes and I would just wake back up with all of these panicky feelings again. And again say, yes, I want these feelings and I can handle it. But for more than an hour, I just went back and forth in and out of panic attacks.
All right, so
story, is that how
it does? It sounds like there's more because I mean,
inspiring, really, Shala.
Yeah,
very happy for you.
So wait a minute. So
thank you.
So what went wrong? You tried an intervention that honestly doesn't sound like a bad idea. So what happened?
So you're right.
My question, Ethan, I really do want to know that.
So it does sound like a good idea, right? I was doing what Reid was saying. I was wanting this. I was saying I could handle it. You were
saying you were wanting it?
I was saying that I was wanting it, but in truth, in here, I did not want it. I didn't want to be feeling like that. I didn't want shortness of breath. I didn't want to feel sick. Didn't want to go to the ER. And so even though I was saying all these things, I was giving lip service to the strategy. I was not embodying the strategy. And after lying in bed for an hour, feeling panicky on and off, all of a sudden I had this thought. I'm like, well, what if now I have panic disorder? What if I have panic disorder on top of OCD and BDD and other things I'm dealing with? Oh my gosh, what are the criteria for panic disorder? I think I need to figure this out. And so I'm lying in bed trying to figure out whether I now have another mental illness. And that's when it hit me. That's when I recognized the pattern. I'm sitting here trying to figure out at 2 a.m. whether I have panic disorder. And that's when I recognized here is my OCD working very successfully to dominate me. This is a huge OCD episode that I didn't even recognize as OCD. I thought it was something real. The moment I recognized it as OCD, I was like, aha, now I know what to do. And so I slithered out of bed because I really did not feel good. And what I wanted to do was stand up and do what I call my shoulders back strategy, which is to put your shoulders back, put your hands on your hips, to act like what OCD is saying is completely and totally irrelevant, to act confident, like you're on top of the world, like everything's fine. Wasn't quite physically up to that. So I got on my knees on the floor, put my shoulders back and put my hands on my hips. And I said, OCD, Is this all you got? You want to come get me? Come on, bring it on. And my attitude, it matched what I was saying. I did want it because I understood what this was, understood that if I would want this, if I would purposely bring this on, if I would go toward what was scaring me, I would win. And I meant it. And I said it out loud, stood there in my power pose, and then slithered back into bed. And I slept for the rest of the night. And I think it worked because I was displaying the correct attitude. My emotions were tied into the words I was saying, and that made it so much more powerful and so much more effective.
And I think that what you just said was my emotions tied into the word. So there's attitude, and then there is the emotions. And the emotions kind of indicate that we are grounded into it. The other thing that I think is interesting about what Shala's talking about is she had a novel event. Sorry to use that word novel, right? So when OCD, just like health anxiety and other health disorders and mental health disorders, when it gives you something brand new that you've never faced before, you get lost and confused for a while because you don't know whether it's a signal of something serious or just noise again. And so it took a little while for Shala to get out. So this wasn't any kind of failure at all on Shala's part in the beginning. It was a figuring out period. She had to go through that for as long as she needed to until she said, wait, and I would just put words in her mouth right now. Oh, I'm doing it. Right? Oh, I'm doing it again. Here's the pattern. So just, simply put, OCD is going to give you a specific threat. It needs you to focus on the specific. It needs you to want to get rid of the specific. That's the pattern. And you want to learn your derivatives out of that pattern and then go to disrupt that. So OCD wants you to focus on the specific. Your job is to get off the specific and think about more general moves. It wants you to fix this specific problem. You decide, there that is. I'm not fixing that. And then when you don't fix it, you sit with distressing doubt and uncertainty. And you welcome that because OCD needs you to go, oh no, I got to get rid of this. And OCD wants you to remain focused on this topic. You're going to turn your attention elsewhere to the best of your ability. And then it wants to disturb you again. And then when it does, you go, oh, fine, let's go back to work again. Right. So we're going up one level of abstraction around this work in recovery, up here to principles, and then back down again to manifest them. And it's like, in the moment, it's like a moment by moment delivery system of a protocol that you've adopted. The actions manifest the strategy.
In terms of what these actions look like, they can vary. And I don't do the same thing every time. It depends on what's bothering me and what I've been working on lately and all of that. But I'll give you some examples of the variety of actions that I take that if you think they might work for you, you could try as well. So one of the first things I always start with when OCD puts something in front of me is to ignore it. This is a strategy that I have worked really for years to learn how to do effectively, because my primary ritual was mentally ritualizing, and I could mentally ritualize while doing almost anything else. I had to learn how to disengage with the OCD in my head, because I was used to OCD saying something and then I would say something back to it, and then we'd be in this conversation that would go on for hours and hours or however long. So I had to learn how to hear OCD talking and turn away and not say anything to it. This actually works really, really well. And the reason it works so well, and this actually comes from something Reid wrote in the afterword to Fred, one of my favorite lines, when he said, if you do not pick up OCD's content, you do not have to work to set it down. And so if you can ignore it, that's great because you're not giving OCD anything at all to work with. But if you're not there yet, that's okay, because it took me a long, long time to learn how to do this effectively. But it's probably the strategy I take most often. You can also encourage and support yourself, which is exceptionally important because what OCD does is break you down and tell you how you can't do things. Inherent in my shoulders back strategy is not only this feeling that I'm going to act like the OCD is irrelevant, but it's this empowerment of I am going to put my shoulders back and recognize that I am strong and brave and courageous and I can do this. And telling yourself that is so important because you need to counteract the voice of OCD in your head being critical and judgmental and demeaning and telling you you can't do things because you can.
I moved. No, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I swear. Actually, I mean, everybody is really, really loving this. You know, our dear friend Morgan Ronzanelli makes a great point. She's like, she said, good point, Shala. We can do ERP and we can do ERP. And there's a big difference between the two. John Hirschfeld called you getting out of bed your power slither, by the way, which I appreciated. Yeah. I did too. Real quick before you go on, though, I don't want to, you tell me if this pertains to right now or later, but we had a question much earlier about what your Triad of Hell is and was. So I want to throw that out to you. You can finish what you're saying, but maybe we can define that afterwards.
I will actually, like, what the 3 parts of the Triad of Hell are. Is that what?
Yeah, just what it was. Yeah.
Yeah, I will get to that in just a few points. That's a great place that I can bring that up. So thank you.
Okay, excellent.
All right, so another way that you can address OCD is to talk back to it. And there are 4 different ways that I will talk back to it that I'll go through. If I'm going to talk back to my OCD, my default is the following. OCD, oh, fabulous. Thank you so much for bringing that up. I haven't thought about that in so long. And, you know, I really want to. I want to think about this because it makes me super anxious and I want to be anxious. And this gives me a fantastic opportunity to beat you, OCD. So thank you. And I mean it. I really, really mean it when I'm saying this. And this comes, all these things I'm talking about, I've learned from Reid at one point or another over the past 10 years. But this one comes from when I was in his weekend treatment group 10 years ago. And he put this slide up that was a quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson that said, if a dog is chasing after you, whistle for him. And that really struck a nerve with me because when OCD is coming after you, when you're untreated, you are running away, you're doing compulsions and trying to get rid of your anxiety. And that is only making the OCD bigger. If a dog were really chasing you, that would only make the dog chase after you harder. If you turn around and face the OCD and say, come here, OCD, come on, just like you call a dog, right? OCD does not know how to handle that. That is not what you're supposed to be doing. It just knocks the wind right out of its sails. So this is an incredibly effective tactic to just pull towards you whatever it's putting in front of you. So that's the first way you can talk back to it. The second way is reminding OCD of the new rules, because I can tell you that my OCD is quite forgetful and it will forget that we don't do compulsions, or at least that's our goal. And so you can actually say to it, OCD, you know, I'm really sorry, but I'm just not going to do that compulsion. And that's going to make me super anxious. And that's what I want. So again, OCD, sorry, not going to do the compulsion. Can
I interrupt this for a second?
Yes.
And say, you know, part of what Shala is saying, talking to her OCD. However, she's not waiting for an answer. This is a one-directional communication, right? She's not like, and what is it saying now? And, you know, because she's not going to argue back with it. She's going to make her intervention and then she's going to turn.
Yes, that's a very good point. I am not conversing with OCD. I am lecturing the OCD at this point. The next one, the third way I talk back to my OCD, this is a personal favorite, I have to say, is to swear at it, to trash talk it, because it's fun. I wrote a whole blog post, which I think we can post on the threads that you can see, called The Hidden Power of Swearing at Your OCD. If you like swearing, throw some words at your OCD. Tell it what you really think of it. It's sort of fun, and it makes you feel more empowered. And it's a way to express how you feel and get some of those feelings out, and also tell OCD what's what. Now, the fourth way.
Wait, the third way. So what are you trying to convey when you swear at it? Is it just a swear word, or is there a swearing communication you're delivering?
Well, I think it really depends. But I think what you're trying to communicate is, OCD, I'm making the decisions here. I'm the one who's going to be deciding what we're going to be doing. I'm going to be sitting here and being anxious, and you might not like that, but I'm making the rules.
So you might say, effing back off, sucker, right? Something like that. You wouldn't say effing, because I know you.
Right. I probably would say the whole thing, but you know what I mean. I think this is a fun strategy. So you can read.
I used to write curse music to my OCD. Like, I would make up songs that had lots of curse words. So I love this strategy, actually.
Oh, good. I think this one's really fun. So you can read the blog to learn more about this one. So finally, the fourth one, and this is where I can describe the Triad of Hell, because the fourth way I talk back to my OCD is when it's getting super aggressive. And when it's super aggressive and it's the Triad of Hell, this is what it looks like. So the Triad of Hell is a combination of Gollum from Lord of the Rings. So he's obsessing about his precious ring and can't let go of it. Yes. Exactly. And it's a combination of the Tasmanian devil from Bugs Bunny, swirling around, crazy, looking for anything that can frighten it. And then the last part, it's a Dementor from Harry Potter. So, the scaly, scabby hands, and it looks sort of like death, and it's, trying to suck the joy out of your soul. That's what my OCD is like, the combination of those three when it's really aggressive. When it's aggressive, for me to win, I've got to meet it or exceed it on its aggression level, because that's what it's going to take to win. So if my OCD is coming after me very aggressively, then I might say something like this: OCD, you think that's scary? Seriously? You haven't seen anything yet. And then I pair that with something that'll scare the pants off of it. So if it's putting violent images in my head, then I pull out my Oscar that I've gotten for horror film creation, and I create this horror film in my head that makes OCD feel like it's going to pass out. Because what I'm trying to do is show it, I'm not scared of your content. I'm just going to, if you want to dive into this, I'm going to dive into it too, because I'm not scared of it, and I'm going to bring it on.
Have you done anything with food?
Yes, I'm so glad you asked. Yes, I really love bothering my OCD about contamination stuff, because that's one of its worries that makes it cry a lot. So there's a whole story that I think is going to be posted on the thread, where I was in Reid's crew. This is my very first exposure practice session, where I went out and ate a sandwich off the bathroom floor of my hotel, because that's what I needed to do to help my OCD understand that I was now in charge. And I upset my OCD so much during that particular exposure that it just sort of stood up and it staggered around and its eyes rolled in the back of its head and it just passed out right onto the floor. It was awesome. So this strategy is go make your OCD pass out. One up it. You think that's scary? It ain't seen nothing yet. I think what this point brings us to is that all these strategies I've been talking about are all reactive strategies. So this is what you can do when OCD is coming after you. But what's even more powerful is to just proactively go after it. So the more that you will come up with creative ways to, make your OCD squeak, to bother it, to poke it, the more successful you're going to be, and the less you'll need these reactive strategies going forward.
Yeah. And so let me back up for a minute to say, I think in the end, so to speak, the ideal way to be handling obsessions is to let them come in one ear and out the other, as Shala would say, and as John Hirschfeld would probably say as well. It's like, it's nothing. It's nothing. There's nothing to seize, nothing to pay attention to. My opinion, however, is that early on in treatment, at least when we don't have a full handle on it, that this is an aggressive sport. A lot of what the other stuff that Shala was saying. It's like, you got to bring it. You got to want to take it on. You got to get big. It has made you small. You got to get big. I had a client who had that. I love this message. He would say is, come on, OCD, make me stronger. Really use OCD's tactics to build my strength. And I'm coming into your territory, OCD. I'm coming in because the territory is uncertainty, and that's its territory when all this starts. And so I'm going to intrude right into your territory. And I'll say a little what Shala just talked about a minute ago. I have a client I've been working with for a little while, and he's like trying to do, I want uncertainty, but he's not getting it. I send him a message after our session just with all caps and bold and at 16 point or so. I want uncertainty. I mean, that's the level we want. Why? Because I want my life back. So we want people to take ownership here. You don't follow anybody else's rules. Don't follow what Shala and I are talking about today. Go experiment with it, but you have to experiment to make it your own. And that's, I think, where we want to be able, once you make it your own, then you're carrying that strategy into your future.
I like that. That makes a lot of sense. I actually had a question. Shala, if you don't mind, I'd like to go back to the story that happened to you last week when you were in bed and you weren't feeling well. I'm curious because sometimes when I'm not feeling well and I perceive whatever I'm feeling, because I too worry about being sick and things. And so when I'm not feeling well, I use that as an opportunity as an excuse to not have to practice OCD skills and tools because, well, this isn't an OCD thought. If I'm sick, then that's real and the fear is real, and therefore there's validity in that. But what struck me as during you telling that story was that you didn't really care whether it was a real situation or not, whether you had food poisoning or not. That was a separate issue from the fact that OCD was attacking you at that time. And you decided to deal with your OCD, even though it was triggered by this illness, you decided to deal with it regardless.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I think that even with symptoms of food poisoning, even if my OCD hadn't been involved with this, anytime we push back against how we're feeling or the experience of present moment, that's what suffering is, right? Is the pain that we're experiencing times resistance equals suffering, which I think is a Buddhist equation. So anytime you can just be accepting of what's happening, even if you don't like it, I think you make things easier on yourself.
Yeah, because I think there's this belief that if I'm going to be mindful in the present moment, that means removing fear, removing discomfort. Oh, all of that is, but if your present moment is uncomfortable, then that's your present moment. That's your reality. And you have to accept even that and learn how to deal with it. And it just struck me as that. So
well, I want to say one other thing about that. And it comes to what we're doing with COVID-19, which is, this is something for all of us to be paying attention to and be concerned about. But this problem does not get to nickel and dime us all day long. You can't, that's unacceptable. And so we have to set limits around now's the time to be paying attention to this and now's not. And if we don't get a hold of that, then it just burns through our whole day and we're exhausted with all our distress.
So Reid, so you talk a lot about rules and you're big on rules. So can you talk about how they fit in here and basically, I guess, maybe the difference between the rules that OCD dictates and the rules that you're talking about?
Sure. And right, exactly. It does dictate a lot, but we just back up a little bit to say we got this strategy and what we want. There are times when using rules is a way to help control the obsessions that we have. Keep in mind what's going on now in the world. We are in a worldwide crisis in health. And what are we doing? We're turning to rules. We're turning to the CDC and the WHO and going, what are they advising around hand washing? What is the rule about social distancing and so forth? And we're locking down rules in our homes, in our communities, in our cities, states, country, the whole world. So it's a very good opportunity for us to see the benefit of rules. So what we don't want is every time I step into an arena like my kitchen where I'm about to cook with meat and vegetables and so forth, I don't want to have to figure out what to do right now, because if I do it that way and start analyzing what's right, my obsession comes in and says, that's not enough, do more. And so if we can, during a no problem time, talk about my trouble with kitchen when I'm cooking and how intensely I tend to clean, create the rules for what do I clean, how do I clean it, how long do I clean it, and then I step away, lock those down. And then the person who steps in to cook is the worker bee. She doesn't get to, or he doesn't get to make up new rules. You just follow the rules, because if you loosen up your standard in that moment, then that part of you that's victim to your obsessions is going, well, wait a minute, in this circumstance, I'm not sure the rules fit. I don't think I did it quite properly. So that's, when we're dealing with our OCD, it's like a personal crisis, like the world is having right now. And I have found those rules have been very beneficial to folks. I'm glad you appreciate it. So,
and I think Ethan might.
Actually, Ethan's frozen.
Ethan is actually.
You have any rules that you're using these days around the pandemic?
I do. Oh, wow. Okay. Lost.
I'm in charge now.
Excellent. So while we wait for Ethan to come back on, yes, I will tell you about some rules that I've had around this pandemic. So Reid and I, along with Kimberly Quinlan, wrote a blog post about managing OCD about coronavirus at the very beginning of this whole pandemic. And one of the things that we started out with was manage your news intake. I started out my news intake, maybe looking at the news or the newspaper once a day. In a couple of weeks, that had morphed to twice a day. By last week, it was probably 3 times a day. And I had gotten so, yay, Ethan.
We were talking
Sometimes stuff happens. You got to roll with it. That's okay. That's why I left, to give you guys an opportunity to talk. Please go. I actually had a question, but you carried on. So please go on, Shala.
So anyway, I had been checking the news so frequently, I could probably give you counts of how many people had COVID in each state. I mean, I was overwhelming myself with data that wasn't actually providing any useful information, but it was ratcheting up my anxiety and my OCD. And I noticed that all the time, going back to something Reid just said, it was a crisis in my head constantly. I was constantly thinking about the pandemic. It was making it hard for me to focus on my day-to-day activities. So last Saturday, I said, you know what? I'm not checking the news anymore for a week. And that made me anxious to start out with, because it had become compulsive. It was a need to know. I just needed to know what was going on. And then I needed to figure out how we were going to get out of this crisis. And the more I was reading, the more I was realizing we don't know how to get out of it yet. And that was just making me more anxious. So I didn't check the news for a whole week. I checked this morning quite quickly, within 5 minutes, and I'm probably not going to check again for another week. So I think you can make rules and then give yourself permission to change them as needed, because we're learning as we go along with all of this. The other thing to keep in mind, because if you have OCD, all of us with OCD can turn almost anything into compulsion if we're not careful. So look at your rules and just make sure that they're not becoming too rigid. Getting back to Ethan's point about rigidity versus flexibility. If it's seeming like the rules are becoming too rigid, then mess things up a little bit so it doesn't feel like it's becoming compulsive.
That's great. I apologize. I got kicked off apparently for some reason. If you had a question, I have some questions here, but I lost a fair amount of the comment thread. So if you want to copy and repost your question, please do. I do have a question that I was going to ask in regards to rules, which is, it sounds like there are a few things that we have to look at as to what rules we follow and what rules we don't follow. And I think the first thing is context, and the second thing is who's dictating the rules. So I think in one regard, for instance, if we identify OCD as dictating rules, we probably don't want to listen to those rules. However, if the rules are from the CDC or the WHO, or they're rules based on our own values that are going to drive us toward meaningful things, those are rules we want to pay attention to. So it really depends on the situation and who's providing the rules, right, Reid?
Yes, and also I think the other thing you can kind of check into around the rule is when you think about that rule, are you feeling really anxious and tense, and how important it is to make sure you manage that rule? That emotional response to the rule may, if I don't follow this, something terrible will happen, will give you a little clue as to who's controlling that rule at that point. And
right.
When it's that intense, you want to kind of step back and go, where's this anxiety coming from? And I challenge this for a moment.
Okay, I love that. And what are you doing, Dr. Wilson, during this? What kind of rules have you put in place for yourself? Unless you answered that when I disappeared.
I did answer.
Okay.
Already.
I don't buy it. Well, I think is now a good time to open it up. I loved all of that, and I always learn things when I talk to both of you. I think that it's interesting. I had a question, Shala, and I'm seeing again. If you had a question earlier, I sincerely apologize. Please feel free to re-ask it down at the bottom. I'm back on. We can also feel free to email it to us, and I'll make sure that everybody gets it. So we'll give that information out at the end. It was just right here. Somebody asked a question, and it was really good because it was a question that I had. I don't want to take up too much time trying to find it. But let's see. I'll look for a question mark. But here's the gist. The gist is when you were talking, Shala, it's interesting about again, I'll go back to your last week-isode. I call them OCD attacks. I get OCD attacks every now and again. So, when we're in this moment of panic and fear, we lose what we've coined insight. We lose insight into what's happening and objectivity. And so I thought it was really interesting that in the midst of you struggling with insight because you were caught up on the OCD roller coaster, which we all get, when insight kind of poked its head around the corner, you were able to identify it, grab it, latch onto it, pull it out, and really use that sort of as the vine to pull yourself out of the quicksand. Mm-hmm. There was a question, I can't find the question, but somebody asked, how can I if I'm not recognizing the OCD, how do I even attempt to combat it and resist it? And I thought that was a really good example of you've trained yourself to, when you see that shiny sparkle, like, oh wait, I know that's the light at the tunnel. I'm gonna head. What kind of things have you done to be able to regain insight and objectivity in the midst of OCD and panic?
I think it goes back to those patterns. What enabled me to recognize this was OCD was I noticed the pattern. And so even if there's a part of my brain that's still holding on to this can be real, which almost is always occurring at some level when you're in the middle of an OCD episode, if I can recognize the pattern, it's if it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck and walks like a duck, it's a duck. If you think this is OCD, it probably is. So I would treat it like OCD, even if I'm not 100% sure that it is OCD, because I don't think that's going to do you any harm. It's good exposure practice. And that way you're catching a broader variety of things that probably are OCD. And you can use all of those as opportunities to practice and get stronger.
And
there's the question.
Add to it just a minute. It's like, okay, well, is it my theme? we only have 2 or 3 or 4 themes probably in OCD. Is this my theme? Am I working myself up and feeling anxious and intense about it? And am I, for some people, predicting something terrible if I don't figure it out? There's, now we don't have to get specifics about what the question is, but it's the domain that shows up, the whole feel of it all. And then that's a good time to be able to, as I would say, step back in order to step up. Let me step back away from this. Really feels like I'm winding myself up again. Let me check it out.
And we found Fran behind the scenes was able to find the original question that I saw, which Amy brought up. So I kind of want to explore this because this is really important if you haven't had treatment. So I was coming from a perspective in my question of Shala, who's in her maintenance phase in her life, where she's successfully managing OCD. That doesn't mean that it doesn't rear its head, as you just talked about, but it means that overall it doesn't impede functionality and your ability to engage in life and even enjoy it. But Dr. Wilson, so I went 17 years without ERP. I was fully a slave to my OCD. I was doing everything it said, and I couldn't even tell the difference between me and my OCD. What are some good ways? I mean, obviously getting into therapy, but what are some of the beginning steps at being able to recognize the question, recognize OCD and be able to determine that voice versus your voice and kick it in the butt?
Well, I don't know that I have a lot of answers around that, but part of it is step back for a minute to who's around me, my family, my closest friends. Sometimes what happens is others recognize this in me before I recognize it myself. And then I need in some way to be able to be available to receive that kind of feedback. And then we want, we talk about stepped care in terms of health and mental health problems. And that first level of stepped care is free or easily accessible information about the problem. And so if I can start reading up on this problem and starting to get the cornerstone of what the symptoms are and how it affects people, then I can start to see whether this class of people fits me. And then we start trying to identify, okay, what are the themes that I tend to get hit with? And then what are my reactions in those moments? Boy, now as Shala was saying, starting to walk like a duck, maybe that's it. You certainly aren't going to get the answer all the time. You're certainly not going to always recognize it, especially when we're talking about these new things that start coming up. So the biggest thing I'm saying is sometimes you have to be available for feedback from other people and not remain defensive about, sometimes I say, look, what you're doing about this problem, would you write a letter to the editor of the local newspaper and tell everyone in the community that they should operate like you operate? And it's at least it's a beginning of a challenge of, is this OCD or is this legit?
I think one other thing to add to that, if you look at what it's doing to your life, I had OCD that was untreated for decades, and the longer I had it, the smaller and smaller and smaller my life was becoming, because OCD only wanted me to participate in things that were completely safe and secure, that nothing bad would happen. If it could have had its ways, I would have lived in a cardboard box in the middle of the living room and never left. So I think look at the things that you want to do in life and try to be honest with yourself about how is all of this affecting what you care about. Are you able to do it, but you're tormented? Are you not able to do it at all? And I think giving yourself some honest answers to that will also help you see how much OCD is at play.
Yeah, and it's a practice. It's like working out. It's the more you do it and identify it, you may only be able to see tiny parts of it at the beginning, but the more you do it, the more you recognize bigger pieces, and that sort of diffusion starts to happen, and you start to separate from your thought. We're getting some great questions. I want to help clarify some things for some people. So Dr. Wilson, Renee wrote, "Stopping the Noise in Your Head and Everyday Mindfulness are my Bibles. I have many people I have recommended these books too. I won't give them my copies because they are loaded with notes and highlights. So she loves your book, but she's extremely selfish. Yeah, but so I think so. Then Ben asks
that he doesn't think you're selfish. No,
I don't know. I'll have to live with the uncertainty. So Ben asks, is Dr. Wilson the one who wrote "Stop" in your head to try to stop obsessive thoughts? If so, could you explain if and how that principle still applies? So can you explain the difference between thought suppressing, I think is what he's asking, and what you're talking about?
Well, the book's called "Stopping the Noise in Your Head." So part of what I'm distinguishing is signals versus noise. Signals are things I need to pay attention to, and I got a handle on that. Those are the things I need to problem solve. Noise is what OCD is, and those obsessions. And you know, the title of a book and really the contents of the book are always a little different for people. My first book was Don't Panic, but of course, you know, that's not really what you do, not panic. And Stop Obsessing was the second book, and it's not quite like that. You know, so it's learning to tolerate those kinds of things. So, and then what do you think they also want to know about that?
Oh, I just wanted to clarify that you weren't saying stop the thoughts. That's all.
I wasn't saying thoughts suppressing. No.
Okay, perfect. So I just want to read Chuck. You don't have to put this up, Fran. Chuck said, thank you for the answer, Shala, and the explanations, Dr. Wilson. It took me years to realize that I actually had any autonomy of mind over OCD, which for me, I think was necessary for any therapy to work. That OCD was a separate entity. I used my brain has OCD, but my mind can beat it. What my brain is saying, strategy, and still do. So Shala, I talk about this all the time. How important is it to separate yourself from the disease/disorder?
It's crucial, I think, because if you think that OCD is you, then you are fighting with yourself. And it's hard to say if you're fighting with yourself, well, was that a rational thought or an irrational thought? If you can separate the OCD from yourself and assign irrational thoughts, the irrational thoughts to the OCD, well, that's OCD and that's its pattern. It makes it so much easier to be able to implement therapy because you have a opponent who has a strategy and you are going after that opponent. So it just sets it up, as Reid always says, as a mental game, and you need an opponent to be able to play a game. So give yourself that opponent.
I think one of the first things I correct with people when I'm seeing them and they're talking to me is when they go, yeah, and then my brain says, and practically speaking, that I don't like people talking like that because, oh my God, I got to change my brain. That's like, whoa, right? But if we talk about externalizing, this is how we want OCD to be when we're strong. We want it to be outside of us. So why don't we just start with the position of it being outside of us and we're in a relationship with us? Let's handle that relationship. So it's a handy way to talk consciously about this unconscious drive that we have. It's the best thing we can do right now. Come back and see us in 10 years and we'll have a different approach.
I think it's important to point out, and Shala, I'll throw this back to you, is that, you know, the longer you live with untreated OCD, the harder it is to de-identify. And really OCD makes up so much of our identity before we're treated because we really don't know the difference. We just think that's us. And so the longer we go untreated and then discover that it's this OCD thing, it's kind of harder to untweeze ourselves from the OCD. What was your experience with sort of, I think my first question is, what was your relationship with OCD before treatment? And then we've already talked about how you identify with it now, but what was the process of sort of identifying who Shala was and what her OCD was?
Before treatment, my relationship with my OCD was really, I think, one between victim and abuser. And I mean, my OCD emotionally abused me for decades and I couldn't get away and I didn't know how to get away. And even though I had it that long, I think even when I was untreated, I probably did see it as being this thing that was wrong with me that kept making life hard. And so when I learned I had OCD and learned there was treatment, for me, it was, I'm not letting this do this to me anymore. I'm not letting myself be the victim. And so what I did was I took, I think, a huge amount of anger towards what the OCD had done to me. And I tried to productively channel it into doing the exposures because it had taken so much. It took so many years. It took so many experiences from me that I'll never get back. And I used that to say no more. This isn't happening to me anymore, OCD. I'm not going to let you do this. I am going to use these tools and I'm going to go towards what scare me. I'm going to go towards the thing that matter in my life.
Can I add?
Yeah, absolutely, of course.
So I think there's two things here. One is what you're alluding to, Ethan, which is, I think, so if I lose my OCD, who the heck am I? I don't know myself without it. And that's something it can be perplexing. And the only thing I want to distinguish that from is severity of the disorder, because I don't think severity of the disorder is correlated with prognosis. In other words, you can have had really tough and still do have very intense, difficult, long-lasting OCD, and you can actually have a light bulb go on and catch on and accelerate out of that problem into some good, healthy behavior. And then other people may have a more milder form of it, but just can't get it going. And I don't really understand all the reasons why some people end up suffering for so long, but I do want to break this myth of severity and length of disorder with how tough it's going to be to get better. Don't take it on. If it ends up being tough, well, then take it on as tough, but don't assume it's going to be like that.
I think that's huge. I think that so you're of the mind, Reid, that we shouldn't necessarily say, well, oh, I had severe OCD.
Well, I don't, that's fine to say I had severe OCD. I don't want that to imply, therefore, my treatment is going to be so difficult and take so long, and I might never get back to the level I want to be at. That's not, it's just simply not true.
So you've seen people that have suffered for decades that come in and progress very, very quickly. And you've seen people with mild symptomatology that come in and really struggle to grasp the concepts and move forward. That's what you're saying? Absolutely.
And I would say right now, I've got somebody who is a diligent student of the work, really works hard, applies what we're talking about, and is just getting his ass handed to him, if I can say that. It's baffling to us, and we're doing the best we can around it. But he is working hard, and sometimes it's like that. And part of what I need to do as his therapist is to say, let's keep going, let's keep looking at angles. I'm not going anywhere. You are not alone, and we'll do the best we can to figure it out. And you got me. You got support. You got people around you. So, because it can be really discouraging for some people.
And that's, I think, the most important point is that you, Dr. Wilson, and really excellent therapists like Shala are remaining flexible with sufferers and patients and going in there, and it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. And it's ERP, absolutely gold standard of treatment, but within that, we are going to figure out angles and ways to get you where you need. And if the usual protocol doesn't work, there's 8 other that we're going to try. We're not going to abandon you in this process. There is a way out, and we're going to help you find it.
Absolutely, because we all need placebo. If I'm taking on work for whatever problem I might have with a health professional, I want them to go, I'm not quitting on you. I got lots of resources. Let's stay at it. I got your back.
That's so important. I could talk for hours on this subject because it's something I'm very passionate about. I don't know why I'm getting emotional for some reason. But in my own story, I think I would have given up on myself long before my therapist gave up on me. And I had a team, but my particular sort of the woman that was spearheading my approach really just every time I threw a curveball for months and months and even years, she just never gave up. Every time I undid all the work that we did, every time I undid the progress, every time everybody thought I was sort of in the clear and I just flipped it on its head. If people know my story, it was 10 months before I, faked a major accident and just gave into my OCD completely. But, she literally stood by my side and never, ever gave up and just kept ramming it home until like it connected in some way. And so like I am very grateful to therapists like you, Dr. Wilson, and Shala, who subscribe to that belief, because we can't give up on people. If she had given up on, I wouldn't be here today if she hadn't given up on me. And I truly believe that if I can get better, and I know Shala feels the same way, that if she can get better, then everybody can get better. So I appreciate that, Dr. Wilson. Fran, at 2:50 p.m., Zyhammer asks, how do delusions or persecutory delusions develop from OCD if they do?
Shala, are you taking that, or you want me to take that?
I certainly can. I mean, so I think we're talking about two different types of disorders here. So if we really have those types of delusions, I mean, we probably need somebody who could help understand, is this some type of psychosis? Is there some bipolar going on? Is there something else comorbid with the OCD that is causing those delusions? Because delusions, even though our obsessions may seem delusional at times, and they can actually reach the level of delusions, but again, I think then we're having some other issues going on. I mean, delusions themselves aren't really a part of OCD.
Yeah. So yes, all that Shala said. However, I think when you have OCD, you delude yourself. And that is, with a small d, a useful term to have out as long as you don't get, carried away with thinking you have a different disorder than OCD.
That's a great answer. And I agree. I know for me, Zai, I was pretty convinced that I was delusional and crazy when it was my OCD. And frankly, it was bad clinicians and acute psychiatric hospitals that told me, oh no, you don't have OCD, you're crazy, and you're delusional. And because of bad treatment from uneducated professionals, I believed that. And I remember going to the conference and asking every doctor I could ask, do I have OCD or am I crazy? Am I delusional? And, I think I somewhat believed that and was also seeking a level of reassurance to determine, what was what, and sort of tweeze it out.
But even you needed that level of reassurance. You need somebody to help you make that decision, because if you're going to leave the door open that maybe it's OCD, maybe it's something else, then you can't do the treatment of the OCD. So that's the kind of reassurance that is positive, that you need to close the loophole on that. So going to the conference and asking it, but really good work.
Thank you.
One other point, Ethan, on that one, I think also be aware that there is a type of content of OCD where people with OCD are worried about developing psychotic disorders, schizophrenia, or things. And so you have to understand whether, if you're worried about having persecutory delusions, is actually part of an obsession, worried about whether you're developing psychosis.
That's great. That's great. Actually, Fran, I just sent you this, but I want to get to this question. Feel free to put the whole thing up and we'll see how it goes. This is at 3:04 p.m. Susan asks, question regarding making rules ahead of time. And Shala, I'll throw this at you. Specifically those kitchen rules. How does someone with OCD know if a rule is something someone without OCD would do or not? Like, would a person without OCD use food that had fallen on the floor or may have been sprayed by accident with some kitchen cleaner? So that's a great question. I relate to that a lot. We're looking for sort of reassurance in other places as opposed to trusting our uncertainty. Shala, take it away.
So one answer to this question is just going to play off on what Ethan just said, is maybe we just live with the uncertainty and we don't know and we just go with it. I think if you're working on treatment and you're trying to establish rules for treatment, exposure rules, for instance, it's okay to ask one person one time a question to try to normalize. But that's it. Not asking anybody else, because then we get into reassurance seeking. I think when you have OCD, you lose what's normal and you actually don't know what other people do. And so it can be a helpful question to try to understand what normal is, because that's what we're trying to head for. But we got to really be careful not to head over into reassurance and make sure that everybody is agreeing with what we're doing and that everybody would agree it's normal.
And I also would say, if somebody sits down with me to try to work out a practice they're going to do and figure out what the rules are going to be, we're just going to collaborate with what we think the best rules are. And I don't care what the rules are. They're not my rules. So if you want to, if you've been checking your front door 20 times and to make sure it's locked, and you want to check it 5 times now to make sure it's locked, that's what you want your rule to be, then go with that. Same thing with the kitchen. It's like, whatever, you don't have to do what everybody else does. Is it moving you along in your work? And that's the only thing. I want rules that allow me to have some degree, at least some degree of uncertainty and distress regarding my theme. And if I can create a rule like that, then that's the rule I'd like to make. The next time I see them, we'll start over and revamp the rules and have new ones.
And that's great, Reid and Shala. I think that in my own therapy, I subscribe to this belief of handing over the keys, so to speak. If you're driving, so we've been driving along with our OCD, we may not be able to discern and make healthy decisions until we sort of rewire and relearn. So I'm going to hand my car keys to Reid and let him drive for a while and reteach me what it is. So in essence, I'm going to let Reid help me recreate the rules for myself to follow. But then at that point, my OCD is going to question what Reid and myself have decided, and then seek reassurance from a bunch of other people to see if their rules line up with what I'm doing. And that's where it can get to undoing and compulsive in a way. So we want to trust our therapists and our experts, help them help us define our new rules and then stick to those. And whatever else uncertainty creeps in around those, we're just going to have to sit with that. Renee at 3:04 p.m. I'll just put up the base of her question, but I'll read you guys the whole thing. I have self-harm OCD. I have never self-harmed, for the record. Rumination and focusing on my feeling is my biggest compulsion. There are days that I see this as OCD, and others I am unsure. The unsure days send me into panic attacks. How do I let the panic be there and stop the ruminations? Fred, why did I call you Fred? Reid. Oh, Fred in the refrigerator. I was thinking, yeah. You want Shala to answer?
No, Reid, you take that one.
Oh, well, the answer is you're not going to know. That's the whole thing. When you that great that you got times when it's OCD, but again, when it is my theme. I have never self-harmed, and I freak out about the possibility of doing it. So I'm going to treat it, how I tend to do around this rule is, if it's my theme and I'm not sure whether it's noise or a signal, then I'm going to treat it as noise and risk that it's a signal and I miss it. And because if I don't do it like that, then I'm always going to be blackmailed. Every event's going to be an exception to the rule. So I think, when you get to this is exactly the cusp that you want to be on, is to have these moments when it's my theme and I can't know. This is how insidious the disorder is that it has you challenge every rule, just like you finished saying, Ethan, around, once it's in place, it starts challenging it. And then it challenges these moments like this is an exception. And it could, people do self-harm. Even people with OCD with self-harm fears can self-harm. There's that logic again. And you got to find some ways to step right on through during those times when you are not sure. Tough call to do, but it's the work to be done.
And Renee, I don't normally plug my stuff, but because I had self-harm OCD or have, and it's one of my subtypes. If you want to just Google Ethan Smith keynote, in my keynote address in 2014, I talk a lot about what I had to do in order to move forward with self-harm, in terms of, having to be okay with the possible reality that I may, in fact, accidentally kill myself, even though I don't mean to, and what that meant moving forward. So feel free to Google that and take a look. You can also email me and we can talk about it further. Katie has a great question at 3:05 p.m. For externalizing OCD, is there a benefit to treating your OCD as a misguided friend or faulty advisor versus a villain to be concurred or something more vicious? Shala.
Sure. I think this is a great question, Katie, because there are different ways that you can look at your OCD. And I think, as Reid mentioned at the beginning of this, your relationship with your OCD can change over the course of your life. There are times when I'm actually quite compassionate with my OCD. I do see it as a misguided entity, because it's a part of my brain that is an overachiever in terms of identifying and reacting to threats. It is actually trying to help. It's just incredibly misguided. And if seeing your OCD as that, as something that you need to take care of and be more compassionate with, and that helps you to do exposures, I think that's completely fine. And I think that your relationship and how you view your OCD can change moment by moment based on what it's doing. And I think that's that being flexible too. You can have a variety of different personifications for it that work for you in different situations.
Yeah, and I think your middle choice of the three things that you said you did with OCD, the one in the middle was supporting myself, helping myself step forward, reassuring myself, I got this, I can handle this. So taking it on as my obsession is a younger part of me, perhaps a less resourceful part of me, a more frightened part of me, and I can take care of that part of me. I don't need to chase her away. I don't need to kill her off. I need to make her not be the executive here and let me be the executive. The therapeutic voice, when we talk about OCD having this particular voice, and then we could talk here about my obsessive side being a particular voice, and then I've got a therapeutic voice that comes in too. I need to carve that voice out. And early on in treatment, that's really weak. But over time, as Shala can tell you over her 10 years, is that voice gets stronger. And so I think it's fine to not take on, it as a villain, or I never talk about OCD as a villain anyway. I talk about it as a challenger, not the competitor, the enemy or anything, but just the challenger.
So, and thank you, Reid. I appreciate that. We have time for one more question. I'm going to ask it in a second because it airs on the political side, which I don't want to talk about. But this is something that we've been seeing and we should address. Now we haven't talked about it in a minute. So Shalamantian at 3:20 p.m. says, he first asked, actually, what should I do if my roommates make me wear a mask? So, but then he follows up with, why are we as a community accepting the mainstream media which lives on people's fears? Isn't OCD treatment meant to question the collective fear of germs? So I want to clarify first what he's saying, which is what we've seen is some OCD sufferers feel that engaging in vigilant behavior that the CDC and WHO are recommending goes against OCD treatment and could perhaps, and he didn't say this, but perhaps instigate a relapse. Now, we've been talking a lot about this on the streams, and we've been talking a lot about the difference between following guidelines and then moving into obsessive behavior. Either Shala or Reid, can you speak a little bit to that?
Do you want to start, Reid?
Sure. I think right now, and this is where I started when the virus came onto the forefront 2 months ago, which is we're going to follow the guidelines that are given to us, and those may be more strict than our treatment for our OCD has been. And when this is all over, some of us are going to have to claw back our territory that has been given up. But right now, we are a world community, and I am going to be biased in favor of, if one thing comes out of all of this, hopefully worldwide, it is not a position of us against them. That when we have crisis like this, we come together as a damn community and handle this. And there is no other way to handle this than when all, am I getting loud yet? When all of us put our resources together and solve this, not making bad and good cadres of people in the world. So I say err on the side of following rules that are being handed to us as a good citizen of this world community, and we'll deal with what residuals we have in OCD when it's all over.
Shala.
I totally agree with what Reid's saying. And here's the other thing I would add to that, and this is from my own personal experience. Because I have contamination OCD, and that was one of the most severe types of OCD that I have dealt with in my life. When I was checking the news 3 times a day, I can tell you that my OCD was spinning all the time. Germs, 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 germs. I was just thinking about it all day long. Virus, 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 germs, germs, germs. Like every time I would do anything, I was thinking about what I needed to be doing in terms of this coronavirus pandemic. When I stopped feeding that with all the mainstream media, then I was able to go back to my life. And when I was in situations that I needed to do what Reid was saying, where I actually follow the rules, I would follow the rules, and there was a ton less anxiety about that because I wasn't feeding it by listening to the media all day long. I was understanding there are things I need to do, and I'm just going to do them. But I'm not going to spend all day long focusing on it, because that is actually exacerbating my OCD and making things worse for no purpose.
And as an OCD community, go ahead, Reid.
I was going to say, I've had to do this with several people. You know, I had a client who's coming in who is like totally consumed around what is happening in the world, and what if nobody, sticks to their guns, and what if we, and what I said to him in the end is like, look, and I've said to others too, it's like, if your obsessions around how the rest of the world is going to handle all of this is out of control, then set that down. The rest of us who haven't gotten caught up like you are in all of these obsessions, we will handle it. And we do not need you to be involved in it right now. You need to take care of your own health. And all that's happening right now is that your health is deteriorating, and you're not making a contribution by obsessing around all this outside world. Pay attention to who you love, who you're living with, your immediate community, and your family, and leave the rest to us. So in part, what Shala was saying is, I watched, all that was going on in the media. Then I said, look, I have my rules for now. Nothing in the next 36 hours is going to change so dramatically that I have to learn about it to change how I deal with my ritual in my home. I don't need this now. And she turns it off.
Yep, that's great advice. I was reading some of the comments still on this discussion. And at the end of the day, look, we have to remain flexible as a community. The residential programs have gone virtual. Programs that didn't wash hands for 20 seconds are now washing hands for 20 seconds. And Carl made a great point, which is, how can I trust the mainstream media? Maybe an OCD doubt. We've had lots of conversations about who to trust and who not to trust, and who do I know how to trust? And is the CDC right? And are they right? Or are they going to be right down the road, and all that other stuff? The only other thing I'll add to that is, like, let's say, I can almost promise you that if you wash your hands for 20 seconds, your OCD probably still won't be satisfied. And at the end of the day, satisfying is not what we're in the game of doing, and we're in the game of pissing it off, for lack of a better word. And so, no matter what we do, really, OCD is still not going to be happy with it. So, but thank you. We're running out of time. I want to thank our guests, Shala and Reid, for a really, really, really great conversation and great input. Thank you guys for joining me. Thank you for taking the time to build out this conversation, which was really meaningful and helpful. The comments are fantastic. I would urge you, as I always urge everybody, to please go through the comments. People advocate for themselves. They answer other people's questions. Also, we've been the IOCDF and Fran behind the scenes, and as well as the Peace of Mind Foundation, have been leaving links and comments throughout as we bring up things so you can follow, whether there's some of Shala's articles, links to Reid's books, links to my keynote. So definitely take some time to go back. Yes, this will be, it is being recorded. It will be live on Facebook and YouTube, as well as the iocdf.org/justethan webpage. Just some super last minute announcements. You'll be able to find links. You'll also be able to find links and resources to all of Shala's and Reid content on that landing page. We will be, I always want to thank the IOCDF and, of course, my partner behind the scene, Fran, as well as the Peace of Mind Foundation for sponsoring and partnering with us. Actually, a couple special announcements. So the first one, and I said I had this, is Just Ethan, the original one, which is just me. If you're tired of seeing me, it'll be a good ERP. So show up. We'll return this Tuesday night, and what we're doing is we're having a special screening of the OCD documentary, Uncovering OCD, The Truth About Obsessive Compulsive Disorder. This is a documentary that I wrote and directed with some amazing advocates in it. We're going to be having a watch party for the first 42 minutes. And then we're going to have an amazing advocate and friend, Chris Tronston, who's also in the documentary, and we'll be answering all your questions. That'll be Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern. So definitely tune in and look for posts for that.
For you, Ethan?
What's that, Shala?
Can we plug your documentary for you? Because it's amazing and awesome. Yeah. Beautiful, beautiful documentary. So if you have not seen it, take this opportunity to see it. Because if they don't watch it live, it's not like available other times, right?
Yeah, it'll be available for 24 hours afterwards, and then we'll take it back down. We'll be releasing it over the summer, probably. So definitely tune in. You'll want to see it. Also, if you haven't already, whether you're watching on Facebook, whether you're watching on YouTube, Fran, hit it. Please subscribe and follow on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube and Twitter. You will find all of the subscription to be notified of all the videos and contents as we go throughout these weeks. We love bringing this programming to you. If you're a clinician and you have questions, feel free to check out the IOCDF's Education Staycation for Clinicians. There's great content for there as well. Until and also on Wednesday night, we will be having a conversation solely on intrusive thoughts. And we'll have an amazing panel for you as well. So again, thank you, Shala. Thank you, Shala. Thank you. That's thank you waving, and that's Shala. Thank you, Reid and Shala, for spending your Saturday afternoon with us. Thank you to all of you for spending your Saturday afternoon with us, or if you're on the West Coast, the morning, or if wherever you are, it could be earlier morning. But thank you. As always, contact the foundation if you have questions. Anybody here can email me at any time at justethan@iocdf.org. I always get emails. It may take me a minute, but I will always answer them. Have a wonderful day. Stay safe, stay vigilant, feel all the feels. Do not let OCD off the hook. And thank you so much. Bye.